Welcome back, 508, to part 2 of our discussion of the major approaches to reading instruction. So we left off talking about the uses and the misuses of basal reading programs, and so I left off with the directed teaching of skills. So just teaching skills in isolation and not in context would be an example of a misuse of a basal. And workbooks as well. So just using all those workbooks and not allowing students any authentic practice would be a misuse. And the last would be pacing charts. And so that would be a case where the pacing chart is not a guide, but rather more of like a dictum. That would be an example of a misuse. And so in my opinion, much of the program fidelity models of implementation around open court in our area in particular would be considered a misuse of a basal reading series or a literature anthology series, because they didn't want to see any differentiation or real true flexibility in how that program was implemented. They wanted to see people doing every step of the program, lockstep, and that's not really a good use of a basal. So the way that you use it should change from year to year, from class to class, because it should be flexible enough to adapt to the needs in the classroom. All right, so let's move into another discussion. Major approaches and materials for reading instruction. Let's talk about some, creative programs that were introduced along the way. So it kind of gives you an idea of the kind of evolution of programs. And so one of those was called the Initial Teaching Alphabet, or ITA, and the other is Words in Color. These are kind of more creative methods that happened or were going on in the 1950s, and so they're kind of interesting to look at. So the Initial Teaching Alphabet was put together by James Pittman in 1961 in Britain. Words like said were spelled said, S-E-D, so they were spelled phonetically. What he said was that there were 44 sounds in the alphabet, 44 basic or initial sounds, so that there should be 44 characters. And remember that this is an initial teaching alphabet, so in the mind of Pittman and those who would use the program, this is how you start emergent readers. It's not necessarily where you move to. They weren't rewriting the English language for longevity. They were rewriting it for an initial instructional approach. So some of the research that came out were that kids who were taught ITA wrote more than other kids, and that this transition to traditional orthography and spelling was supposed to take place in the middle of second grade, and so some research showed that it did do that. What's interesting is that he defined reading as the ability to give sounds to symbols. So if you think about when we encouraged you to create your own definition of reading, that's a pretty narrow definition of reading, because what about comprehension? So what about the higher order thinking skills? But again, if you're looking at it as just an initial teaching alphabet and something that you're only going to be using with emergent readers, then I guess that definition makes a little more sense. So here's an example of what that looked like. All right, I just had to make the screen a little bit bigger because I realized that the way I had it set up before, you really couldn't see it. So with this initial teaching alphabet, it's kind of interesting because, like I said before, there were the 44 sounds and the 44 symbols. And so you'll see, if you take a look, where's my little cursor? There it is. Okay. So if you take a look, and I know it is a little bit difficult to see, so I apologize, but B looks like a B, C looks like a C, D looks like a D. All of those kind of look the same. But when you start to see some differences, so look at angel. So you see how it's got that little X-y kind of looking thing as compared to apple, right? Because apple and angel make different sounds for A. So he figured, well, if they make different sounds, they should have a different symbol. If you take a look at here too, here's one like thumb. You see how that T and H kind of go together? But then look at that. It almost looks like they make the little hook over here go the other way. So the T and H make a different looking symbol here because thumb and that make a different sound based on their vowel combinations. So kind of an interesting approach. Kind of, you know, what's kind of difficult about it is that so this program is, you know, still used in some places, some private schools, some places in Britain. And in class, we have some books that you can see that we share and pass around. So they're kind of interesting to take a look at. But, you know, not obviously an approach that really took hold and folks use or a program. So Words in Color is another program, and that was developed by Caleb Gattegno in 1960s. So obviously some creative things going on in the 60s. He said there were 47 sounds, and looking at ITA, he said, well, it was done to change the alphabet, but, you know, let's add color to the sounds or to the alphabet. So every sound had its own color. So there were 47 of them, so 47 different colors. It's a very intensive phonics program. You can still see it used in some places, mostly in private schools or phonics programs. But students would be moved out of Words in Color when they were ready or fluent. So unlike the other one where the transition would happen in second grade to the traditional alphabet, this was whenever they were ready. So here's an example of Words in Color. And so you'll see the color coding provides the clue to this puzzle because it's unmistakable, it's easily recognized, and does not change the traditional shapes of the letters. It is used on the word charts to identify the sounds. So if you look at the example here, this S is green, and so in pass, it's telling you that this, if you know that it's green, then it makes the S sound. So what's interesting is that that singular S and the double S, when they're in the same color, suggests that you should say them the same way. So therefore, later on, when a kid sees another letter combination, let's say, for example, the word science, right? In science, you would look at it and you would notice that the SC in the beginning and the CE at the end of the word are in the same color, so that you know that that both makes the S sound. So science, they make the same sound. So the student is supposed to associate the color with the sound. And so regardless of the letter, whatever the color of that letter or combination of letters is represents the sound that the student should say. So here's some kind of more, you know, examples of the colors. And so again, when we do this in person, it's kind of cool to see. We've got these books and they have all these different color codings. But again, not really a program that ever took off in any kind of major way. So the problems with programs like ITA and Words in Color is that although they both address phonics in a systematic and explicit way, they offer a really overly simplistic view of reading. So they view reading as really just this sound symbol relationship, and one which downplays the important role of the other decoding skills, the use of quality literature, the use of authentic text, and active comprehension instruction. And so what it really does is it takes an approach that says you are either learning to read or you're reading to learn. And we kind of know now, or it's kind of widely accepted, that even when you're learning to read, you're still reading to learn. And so we focus on comprehension even at the very basic levels or the very emergent stages of reading. So let's take a look at some more literature-based approaches. And so one of the ones that I find pretty interesting is language experience approach. And so this was developed by Roach Van Allen in the 1970s. It's driven by whole language, so it's definitely associated with whole language, which is not, remember we talked about that a little bit when we talked about phonics instruction, and so that's not quite the same as whole word, which would be the control of the words in books like Dick and Jane and the repetition of the words. But rather, if it's whole language driven, it's text-based, and you teach phonics, but you teach it as needed. So it's really good for ELL or ESL students. There's no basal reader. There's actually no reader at all in the language experience approach. What they do is you give students a topic or a prompt, and they write about it. And so teachers sometimes do this whole class where they have the whole class writes a piece together that they construct together. In more advanced programs, the students can actually individually write their own pieces, and these written piece compositions actually form the text for for reading. So students read what they write, and they're supposed to learn their skills through that piece of writing, or class writing is what you sometimes see. They create a class piece in the younger grades. What's neat about it is, students are ushered into the zone of proximal development because this first dimension of reading is accessed, right? So this is our into reading piece, and you're tapping into the student's own schema by having them compose the actual text that they'll be using. So when I say text too, they're not writing books. It's, can be, depending on the level, a paragraph, it could be a page of writing, but that is going to become also what the students read. So it's hard for new teachers to integrate skills into this model. So that's kind of one of the drawbacks of a language experience approach, is that to use it as really a primary reading program in a classroom or in a school, you have to have some really experienced and highly trained teachers. So that, may be difficult. So it's today you see it used in multi-age classrooms most of the time. So think about a language experience approach for a moment, and do you think that this approach has a place in today's classroom? So I'll let you think on that. And unfortunately, I can't hear what you think, but I can tell you what I think. So it's a good approach to use for some students. I don't think that I would use it as a core reading program. It's really good for English language learners. So I've seen people use it really effectively for ELD, and in particular for students who are, intermediate or early advanced, which those classifications, of course, are changing now with our new ELD standards. But it's kind of hard to do as a whole class, and so it's good for small groups, and it definitely has a place in the classroom. But unfortunately, you really don't see teachers do shared writing, but you don't see them using that shared writing or students writing as really a text or a vehicle for reading. So it's not a program that's that a lot of schools use. So let's talk about thematic units for a moment. So for in terms of thematic instruction, or using thematic units or integrated units, these are you read about it in your chapter this week, and these are structured around themes. They're based on particular topics, usually fairly broad themes. For example, my friend who teaches middle school is working on a theme with her 8th graders on perseverance. So all of the selections that they're reading, be they narrative or expository, I guess they'd be more like literary nonfiction in a language arts setting, are all examples of perseverance. So the good thing about thematic units is they really allow for the depth of study of ideas or themes. They allow you to explore some universal themes, and they allow for choice and flexibility on the part of the teacher and for the students. So in the 1990s, there were lots of thematic units, and they were the hallmarks of many whole language programs, and so that's how children were taught to read around these big thematic units. You would pull text on all the same topic or the theme, and all of the activities that you would do would be related to that. You could do this just in a language arts classroom, or you could make them integrated thematic units, which are kind of more powerful, or the more traditional or way to do it, and they would incorporate the different subject areas as well. So just 3 years ago, when we were teaching this class, I would say that thematic units were a great idea, but they weren't really happening in many classrooms. And so what they were doing as themes, or like the themes that were in the basal readers. And so that might be a group of stories that dealt with getting along. There might be a group of stories that dealt with medicine or science, but they weren't really true thematic units because they didn't really integrate anything else besides the reading. And there wasn't really a lot of time or space for the creation of thematic units. They're usually created by teachers. I mean, now you can access stuff online and you can download things, but back in the 90s when we were doing them, that wasn't really there. So they were really created by teachers or teams of teachers at sites, or shared those ways. So There's a good example of a thematic unit that's on page 372 in your text. So if you take a look at that thematic unit, what that is they give you an example of an integrated thematic unit on that one. And so the focus would be self-esteem and diversity of people. And so you see they use as a kind of a core novel, or the core book would be Freckle Juice, and then they've got some related books on the bottom, People, Pond Larker, Thunder Cake. And then you can look at each subject area and you can see how they integrate this theme of self-esteem and diversity of people into the different subject areas. And so within those different subject areas, then they also have the skills that you are going to work on. So that's kind of the tricky thing, or that's what makes a thematic unit good, is that there's specific skills that are happening in each of those subject areas. It's not just that you apply the theme to math, or that you apply the theme to writing, or that you apply that theme to science or art. You want to apply it by being able to actually address the skills needed in that content area and to make that work. So there's an example of that, and they give you the example. Did they give you another one in there? No. They give you some ideas, I guess, for doing Number the Stars as kind of a literature-based mini theme, where you would just integrate the different content areas, but you're not teaching the actual skills necessarily inside there the way that you are with the thematic unit plan. This is just one on page 370 that's for one particular story rather than a longer unit. So thematic units will definitely be making a comeback, because it's going to be the way, I think, that in Common Core we can address our literacy needs, and in particular the fact that we need to bring more expository text into our language instruction, language arts time, but that we also need to apply literacy to our content areas. And so I think thematic units are going to be the way that most schools try to do that.